All right, let's get started. Today, we're going to explore some really powerful ideas from Dr. S. Munirah Alatas. We'll be looking at the surprising links between violence, education, and building peace. We're even going to see how the name of a region can be a source of conflict, and how education might just be the tool we need for a more just world. So let's kick things off with this quote from Professor Wayne Gunwu, because it's a real head-scratcher. Think about it. A huge, thriving region existed for thousands of years without a single common name. Why? That one question, well, it's the key that unlocks this entire topic. Okay, here's our game plan. We're going to start by trying to define Southeast Asia in the first place. Then, we'll get into the tricky stuff, big power politics. After that, we'll unpack a really important concept called structural violence. Check out some peace initiatives, and finally, bring it all home by looking at how education can help build lasting peace. First up, let's dive into the story of how Southeast Asia even got its name. It's a fascinating history, especially because for so long, this was a place that didn't have one single unifying identity. When you look at this map, it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Do we actually need a common identity to build peace and just get along? It's a question that kind of pushes back on a lot of our modern ideas about nations and identity. So the answer to this whole nameless question goes way back to the region's origins. For literally thousands of years, you had two main groups. First, the continental folks who came from Central Asia. They identified with the land. Then, you had the maritime people from southwest China, and for them, the sea was everything. Two very different groups with very different ways of seeing the world. And that brings us to this idea of openness. For 1,000 years before Europeans showed up, this whole area was basically a massive global crossroads. People, goods, ideas, everything was flowing freely. Because of that, nobody really thought about slapping a single name on the whole thing. There just wasn't any strategic reason to do it. So if the people who lived there for centuries didn't name it, who did? Well, that's what we're getting into next. As you can probably guess, it has a lot to do with the arrival of colonial powers, who had some very strategic reasons for giving this place a name. The arrival of European naval power, well, it changed absolutely everything. Their goal was simple: control the region's incredibly rich trade network. And naming the region, that was a key part of their strategy. It was a calculated move designed to maintain influence long after the colonial period officially ended. It's a pretty stark reminder of how just the act of naming something can totally change how people see themselves. The name Southeast Asia really got cemented during World War II. This joint Anglo-American command, SEAC, needed a label for their reports to cover this huge area of operations. It was purely a military and administrative thing. And you can see even they had slightly different ways of writing it, but the strategic goal was exactly the same. Okay, let's pivot now to the real core of this discussion, something called structural violence. We're about to see how all of this history connects to a really powerful and often totally invisible barrier to peace. So, what on earth is structural violence? It's not about soldiers and battles. It's about how our social systems, our institutions, can actually harm people by preventing them from meeting their basic needs. And here's the crucial takeaway. Real peace isn't just when the fighting stops. It's when this kind of violence is gone. And this is what makes it so tough to deal with. It's often invisible, right? It gets normalized through narratives that serve elite agendas. And there's no single bad guy to point to, which makes it incredibly hard to fight. It really drives home that war is just the most obvious symptom of a much, much deeper problem. And you can see this structural violence in a place we'd hope would be free of it: higher education. It's there in discriminatory quota systems, in prioritizing one kind of knowledge while calling others threatening. It's in twisting history to fit a political narrative, shutting down debate, cronyism, and even just settling for mediocrity over actual merit. Widespread corruption is another perfect example of structural violence. As Syed Hussein Alatas laid out way back in '68, it's never just one person. It's a whole system built on secrecy and obligation, usually through bribery, extortion, and nepotism. At its heart, it's about putting private gain ahead of the public good, a total violation of duty and welfare. So, with a problem that's so deep-seated, what can we actually do? Let's move on and take a look at some of the frameworks that are already out there, designed to try and build peace. One of these initiatives is ZOPFAN, the Zone of Peace, Freedom, and Neutrality. The basic idea is for ASEAN nations to get on the same page about how they deal with major powers like the US and China.
That means coming to a consensus on everything from security treaties to foreign military bases to how they engage on economic and cultural issues.
Another really powerful framework is the Amman Message, which tackles the crisis of sectarianism. The core idea here is so important. It makes a sharp distinction between unity and conformity. Real unity, it says, isn't about forcing everyone to be the same. It's about acknowledging and embracing diversity. Because without diversity, the whole concept of unity is meaningless.
All right, so how do we pull all of this together? How can we actually build a peace that's sustainable? Well, as we're about to see in our conclusion, the answer might just lie in reforming the very institutions that shape how we think.
The path forward seems to involve strengthening the frameworks we already have while also exploring new ones, like BRICS. We're seeing the Global South really pushing for multilateral solutions. But there's a catch, a real danger that these new structures could end up just recreating the same old unfair power dynamics.
And that brings us to the most crucial point. The fight for a lasting peace has to start with education reform. We need to breathe life back into the social sciences and humanities. We need to teach the classic texts that help us understand and deconstruct the effects of colonialism. And we have to reverse what's called the zombification of our universities, this hollowing out of academia by market logic, which just reinforces the very structural violence we need to tear down. For anyone who wants to dive deeper into these ideas, this new book, Ivory Tower Reform, really lays out a compelling vision for what change could look like. The book's objectives are super clear. 1, to take a hard, critical look at the higher education system. 2, to expose the decay, political interference, and tensions that are causing these problems. And 3, to call for a complete transformation, one that's built on justice, autonomy, and inclusivity. I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Munirah Alatas for these incredibly powerful insights. I really hope this has given you a new way to think about peace, conflict, and just how transformative education can be. Thanks so much for watching.